So my name is Laura DeVoe. I am one of the advisory board members here at Build the Era. And I am located in the suburbs of Boston, Newton, Massachusetts. Build the Era is an education and advocacy organization focused on transportation and infrastructure as it relates to the Department of Transportation. Volunteers, it's a volunteer founded and volunteer powered organization who were supporters, volunteers, and staffers from the Pete Buttigieg 2020 presidential campaign, otherwise known as Team Pete. We have folks who have joined us from other campaigns because now they've realized kind of what a cool dude Pete was and is. Build the Era's purpose is to connect citizens from across America to the DOT by educating and informing the public as to what DOT does and doesn't do and why it matters. Educate and inform the public to the role that the infrastructure plays in America's quality of life. Provide training and guidance on how to engage with local and federal elected officials on matters related to DOT initiatives. Provide training and guidance on how to advocate for causes related using relational organizing as a primary tool. And finally, create measurable effectiveness and change. In the coming weeks, we'll be hosting a series of Toolkit and American Job Plan webinars that we believe are going to be excellent, informative, and fun. And we invite you to join us. And I'm going to ask Bill to make sure he puts up in the chat the Build the Era website and the Build the Era Action Network page that gives you all of our upcoming events. This Wednesday, we have an event at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with one of our state senators from Massachusetts. Thank you, Christine, who's on the call here, who helped us get this. It's really focused on how do you mobilize in your state. Not all the work we're going to be doing with Build the Era is going to be national. There is local, and hold on, I'm about to speak.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Bless you.
Pollen is here. Pollen is here. That we're going to be doing work in our states. And it's important for you to understand how to work with your state and how to work with your state transportation committee. And so we're excited about Senator Lesser, Eric Lesser, who's going to be joining us to talk about how do you work with your state, and whether you're in Massachusetts or not, it's okay. He has a great amount of experience on how to work with your state, what to do, and how you can activate. So tonight, I want to welcome Lisa Fleishman, who in the few times I've interacted with her, I have fallen in love with her. And I believe that there is a reason why she was so successful in Iowa, because I am not an easy person to impress, and I am entirely impressed. Lisa Fleishman is a native Iowan from rural Iowa, fueled by the belief in a presidential candidate, his values, and the rules of the road. Lisa Fleishman, a former Republican, current small business owner, became a community organizer, bringing a win in the Iowa caucus and opening her eyes to what conversations can create and the strength of relational organizing. I'd love everyone to welcome Lisa, and we're going to drop in the chat the link to her book if you have not purchased it. Her book, Boots on the Ground, a grassroots, I'm going to mess it up, a grassroots tale of neighbors stepping up and into Pete Buttigieg's historic presidential run. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to talk about any of the grassroots kind of stuff, what we did here, and maybe what you can do in your corner of the world to be successful and go out and really make change.
Great. Lisa, before we get into some questions, I would love for you to give us a picture of your life before Pete and what brought you to the Pete Buttigieg campaign.
Sure. So I grew up in an evangelical conservative family. We moved to Iowa when I was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5, something like that. And mostly, we were go along to get along kind of people. Whoever was president, whoever was governor. Um, we didn't, my husband and I in particular, didn't involve ourselves in things that we felt like we couldn't make a difference in anyway. And uh, we felt that, you know, what does one vote mean? What does one person mean? When you're up against sort of these machinations that happen in government and then happen, to affect all of our lives. But what are you going to do about it? And so we really didn't do a whole lot of anything. In 2016, there was definitely a shift. We felt that the sands beneath our feet were shifting. We really did. And what we saw happening just, no, 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 can't be a part of that. So we didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew that we needed to do something, but we had no clue of how to do it or how to get involved or any of that kind of thing. So fast forward just a little bit, and all of a sudden there was this really negative article that I read online about some dude from Indiana who I'd never heard of, who was going to run for president of the United States. And it was such a negative article that I thought, well, who's this rebel? Who is this guy? Right? Because I mean, if you remember at the time, there were all of these really well-known candidates, really, professional people who had been at this for some time, and all of a sudden there was this guy. And so I went ahead and read the article, and after that, I watched that Fox News town hall, blown away. I was just like, oh my God, this guy actually answers questions. Like, and he's being truthful and he's being honest, and he's not telling people what they want to hear. He's telling them what they need to hear. And I fired off an email to the campaign at the time, to whatever their general inbox. And I'm sure it said something like, oh, geez, sure like your guy. Let me know if I can help out somehow. And when you know it, they wrote me back. And that's how it all started.
It's my understanding, you talked at another event that I was at, and you talked about Kenny. Was it Kenny Gonzalez who was your organizer?
So Ken Gonzalez was actually our regional organizer.
Yeah.
Our local organizer was this amazing human being named Stephen D.
Awesome.
Unbelievable, this guy. The work ethic, the empathy, the coaching, all of that kind of thing. And really, they had a strategy to not only teach us what we needed to do to be successful for caucus time, but then also how we could remain solid as a team. And there was an expectation that we would remain after caucus moved on. And what they taught us was so different than any other campaign, from what I understand, because I was a first-time person.
Right.
But a lot of campaigns, my understanding is, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that those campaigns just kind of fizzle out after the caucuses move along. But the expectation was we were built to last, and we were going to go out and change our communities for the better, and we were going to keep doing the good work after they left. And well, here we are.
So you bring that up, and I agree with that sentiment. We heard the same thing up here in New England when we were working with the team in New Hampshire, which was a primary state versus a caucus state, but the relational organizing concept was the same. And one of the things that one of the organizers up in New Hampshire said to me was, once we're done, this allows for you to stay connected in your state and in your region, so that when we move on to the American, now we're talking about the American Jobs Plan, right? And now, now is a time to start to use those relational efforts to be able to have those conversations beyond the people who may have supported Pete in the primary. Now you're talking about other folks. This is where I'm a born and bred not a New Englander. I was actually born in New York, which makes me really obnoxious. So I grew up in New York, and now I live in Boston, two places everyone just universally hates. But the reality is, when I was presented with this idea of what relational was, it took a minute, because I said, you want me to have conversations with people? That's not in my DNA. When it was presented to you, how did you kind of respond to that? What was in your comfort zone? What was in your wheelhouse? And I mean, you're a small business owner, so you do have to have conversations with people, right? How did you kind of respond to this? And did you feel overwhelmed? What was the feeling?
Oh, I thought they were out of their damn minds. I thought they were crazy. The very first meeting that we had, that was our county meeting, was myself, Ken Gonzalez, Stephen D., and a woman from a neighboring town named Karma that I had never met before in my life. And so there we were at my kitchen table, and they laid out these outrageous, at the time, goals.
Right.
Of, we're going to go from 3 to 6 to 12 to 50 to 100 to 1,000. And we're going to do that right here in this very rural, very red county. That's what we're going to do. And I remember looking across the table at Karma, who I had just met 15 minutes before,
Right.
because at least we were fellow Iowans, because
Right.
Ken and Stephen were not from Iowa. They'd never been to Iowa in their life. And I just kind of looked at her like, really? And she kind of gave this, let's go show them what we're made of. And I was like, okay, well, then let's do it. And our first goal that day was so meager, I couldn't understand how that would build any sort of base for a candidate who was unknown, had no money, no office. Remember, we didn't have a t-shirt or a sign or a button or anything. We had nothing.
Right.
And our goal that day was to call 10 people we knew, just 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. And, we'd ask 3 questions. Have you heard of Mayor Pete? Are you going to vote? Do you like him?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand for the life of me how that was going to work. But in retrospect, now I understand that was the foundation stone of what we did in this county, and how we went out and ran the table on caucus night.
And to take that to what we're trying to do now, moving from a candidate to a cause, so to speak. And, there's the American Jobs Plan. There's, this idea of what we're going to talk about in one of our upcoming webinars about how do you take something from your state, what are your state priorities? So let's look at what's happening down, I'm going to mess it up, but I think in Memphis, where you have a major bridge that they say has a fracture. It's not it is a crack. This is a major bridge that's connecting major parts of this area of the country that is now not usable. And that idea of those 3 questions, I want people who are watching this, and we're recording this, and I want folks who are in the room now to think about, if you were to take 3 questions and kind of come up with your 3 questions. What would those 3 questions be around infrastructure, transportation, those things in your state? Because what's a priority in Iowa around transportation and infrastructure is going to be different than New England, Massachusetts, Texas, California, that sort of thing. And as we're formulating about priorities and how do you build those priorities and how do we get to those values? And I think one of the things that really resonated with me, and Lisa, when I heard you speak the last time, and as I know about one of the things you're talking about, is this idea, not only did Pete answer the questions, which one of the people who's in our call was actually at that Fox Town Hall up in New Hampshire. Tracy was there. And he actually answered those questions. But also he told people what you just said, things they may not want to hear, but they need to hear. And that is an absolute, as we frame how we're talking about infrastructure and as we're talking about transportation, some of this stuff is not going to be stuff people want to hear. And especially when you say, okay, let's talk about this bridge that we are now going to have traffic to circumvent this bridge for the next 6 months to a year because we have to replace it. And hopefully it's not a bridge that's in this case that's happening down in Memphis. But, you know, there's a couple bridges around me that we know need to be fixed. And people don't want to hear, oh my, I'm going to be inconvenienced if that happens. Well, guess what? From a safety standpoint, safety isn't always convenient. And what do we want and where do we have to go? And I love what you said, Lisa, about this idea of what are your 3 questions? And I'm going to challenge people, start to think about what your 3 questions are and make them relatable to you, to your organization, to your community, because my community has 3 different questions than your community does. Tell me where you actually, when was the moment where you said, holy shit, this is working? Like, when did that happen for you?
It became very apparent during the steak fry. So the steak fry in Iowa used to be called the Tom Harkin steak fry. He was a senator here forever and ever. And you'd get together and barbecue, and it was kind of a fundraiser or whatever, you know, Democrat event. I had never been, obviously, because I'd been a Republican, so I never went to that stuff. And
A lot of Democrats don't go to that stuff either, so don't worry about it.
Oh, they did that time.
They do.
Oh, yeah, they did. And I remember I pulled in, it was in this huge city park, and it was like a town had sprung up overnight. And I got out of my car and I took a look at all the yellow shirts, all the Pete people. And at that point, I was, you know, pretty much still, you know, just, you know, calling my friends, hey, what do you think about this guy, Pete? Hey, you know, do you want to come to this parade? Hey, do you want to, you know, do this, that? I mean, we didn't have an office. We had nothing. And when I saw all the people there, all the yellow shirts, I was like, oh shit, we're going to go win. That's what's going to happen. We're about to go win.
Right.
And nobody knew it. Nobody knew it. But with that kind of enthusiasm, with that many people, with that broad diversity of different types of lifestyles, educations, socioeconomic, rural, urban, suburban, with all the people there, I was just like, we're actually going to go do this thing. And that was really cool.
Yeah.
That was fun.
It feels nice when the wind's pushing you, when you've got like the wind at your back and all that. That's a great moment.
Yes.
And that's a great thing to feel. Talk to me about values. And when you were having conversations with voters and volunteers and just people who started to kind of tune into Pete, when I have this philosophy that I think values and talking about values and if we for those of us who were members of the Pete train long before others, if you dial back, early in the campaign, Pete was getting dinged a lot for not having policies. He was really trying to go at these values first and then build off of that. And when the policies came, the policies were so gorgeous that some of us were like, here's your damn policies, just shove them in people's faces. But when you were able to talk about values first, did you see if that actually made those conversations when you're having those relational conversations? Did values first make it a little bit easier, have an on-ramp? Do you think that helped?
Oh, it was everything. It was everything.
Okay.
So we weren't required to be policy wonks if we didn't want to be.
Right.
Right. So it wasn't like I would go and, ring somebody's doorbell and try and debate with them Medicare for all versus Medicare for all who want it. That was never a conversation. What the conversation would be like more was, hi, my name's Lisa. I'm your neighbor. And, we're out asking folks if they plan on voting. I've got this list of people here on my clipboard. Who's your favorite? And then as soon as they would tell me, I would say, and if it wasn't Pete, I would say, well, why?
Right.
Why? What's bothering you? What is the biggest concern that you have? How can we go out as neighbors together and go get this thing done that you're worried about? I'm worried about it. How do we go and do this together? And for that reason, I knocked on a ton of Republican doors, constant. It was nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to houses where they would have a Trump flag flying above an American flag.
Yeah.
Or they would have these big 4x8 signs bolted literally to the front of their house. Those were my favorite homes. I loved them.
Tell me why.
Because I wanted to talk to them about what mattered to them and why were they at where they were at. And if we could find a point to, belabor the point, bridges of commonality.
Yeah.
If we could do that, then I could say, hey, why don't you come with me? I agree on this. You agree on this. Let's go out. Let's go change the world together. Let's make it happen. And that is how you change hearts and minds.
Yeah. I like what you're saying there. As you know, our mission here and what we're trying to do with Build the Era, and it's funny because we've had some people who are former Pete campaign folks, like either advising us or heard about us, and they come like, what the hell are you people doing? And we tell them and they're like, well, it's totally Pete people who would get into doing something like this. And I'm like, well, we're not going to apologize for caring. And they laugh and they're not upset or anything. They just think it's great. But when we're trying to build our organization and bring more people to the fold, and I think what happens is there's a challenge because there's not this sense of urgency like a campaign has when it's a cause and it's an ongoing cause. Infrastructure and transportation are going to be with us for forever. And how would you kind of reframe in your mind this idea of bringing what you've learned to all of this, and what you've learned in all of this? And I agree with you is that we don't have, we're a different campaign, we're a different base than maybe some other campaigns are. But how do you think that there is an opportunity to kind of start building what you know from all of this, to have these conversations that can actually be lasting conversations beyond a candidate or a personality?
Sure. I mean, I think that's a really valid question. Here, oh, hey, who's that?
That is Daisy, my beagle, who is going to now start to like kind of, she's in the background on many of our calls.
Well, hey. So as an example here, about, I don't know, maybe a handful of minutes south of me, a bridge fell out. Okay. Just, it gave out. Nothing ever happened to fix it. And so guess what happened?
Oh,
The good news is nobody got hurt. The bad news is if you live in rural Warren County in this segment of, where that highway serves, now all of a sudden you're having to drive an additional 20 minutes around in order to get anywhere because it's not there anymore. Um, and so when you can talk to your neighbors about, hey, we all knew this thing was going to shoot craps. We all knew it. We've known it for 20 years.
right,
Why didn't our legislature fix the damn bridge?
right, right.
Why didn't they authorize the funding? Why was the county lackadaisical about it?
Mhm.
What is happening here? And when you can talk about the practical aspects of, hey, look, if you've got to drive your kids to school now every day because the school bus can't get there anymore, and let's say that you don't have uh, maybe all the resources in the world or all the funds in the world, maybe you have kind of a crappy car, or maybe you don't have enough gas money, and you're having to drive all the way around the county to get around this bridge, that's a problem.
Right.
And why shouldn't we be kind and empathetic and also accountable to the folks who just chose to kick this can down the road forever and ever and ever?
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that there is something that came out of this campaign for me that I always remind myself of. And when I would go and speak at Democratic town, groupings, where you would go to, the Democrats of this town or the Democrats of this ward or whatever, and talk about Pete. One of the things that I always said was, wouldn't it be nice if we had government that worked for people? And wouldn't it be nice if we actually saw government working in ways that we say this improved our quality of life? And quality of life is actually completely connected with government and a functional government. And when we see that our quality of life is impacted in a negative way, so the people in Texas, we all have friends and neighbors and loved ones who live in Texas. There is no reason that anybody for a short, when I heard what the actual temperature was and what caused this, I laughed. I said, are you kidding me? We have worse than that for weeks on end. Right?
I was literally knocking on doors and it was 30 below.
Right.
And so I'm like, how in the world is this happening?
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, so we can't survive in this part of the country in terms of being able to provide adequate services to our people because of basically the government's just not doing what they should be doing. And this is where that is not a Democratic statement. That is not a GOP statement. That is a statement of reality of who fell asleep at the switch and what are we doing to rectify. And I think that something I would coach people in our type of situation is let's go back and do our homework. Every state has homework that they can do where they said, well, we had money we were looking at fixing that bridge in Iowa. And then we ended up not doing that. And we ended up moving that money elsewhere, or we didn't get the override. Massachusetts is very famous for having overrides. We're constantly overriding. Rather than the override didn't go through. And it's like, okay, so why is it that the infrastructure is on the override? Why can't this be part of our daily of our regular work? And so making it a priority. And I think that those are things that we can actually find values, because the value of everyone wants to work, people want to get to their job. They want customers to get to their place of employment. They want to get their kids to school. They want to find their way to the grocery store or the hospital or whatever the case may be. Those are things that we need to do. Do you find those organizational techniques that you were taught during the campaign? And this is my last question, and I want to encourage people to put some questions up in the chat so that we can bring some other folks in. But I'm wondering, do you find yourself going in using some of those techniques in places that you were not expecting?
Oh gosh, all over the place. All over the place. I don't know what it was about that particular campaign that made those principles so accessible to me. Because if you look at it, it's actually pretty common sense, right?
Right.
Go everywhere, talk to everybody, invite them to come with you, go change the world.
Yeah.
Rinse, repeat.
Yeah.
But they made those sort of principles just so we were not volunteers in the sense that it was transactional.
Yeah.
It was never transactional.
No.
We were valued partners in this endeavor,
Yeah.
and we were made to feel like it. But also with that feeling comes responsibility. There was absolutely a sense of, okay, we need to do this thing in the next 7 days, and it's impossible and it's thankless, but this is how we're going to build it. Here's how we're going to break it down amongst the team. This is who's going to do what. This is how we're going to do it. And when we meet here a week from today, we will have accomplished this goal.
Right.
And we did. We never wanted to disappoint, I guess, because we understood what was at stake. We got it.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in rural red Iowa. We get it. So when you're out organizing in your community for whatever cause it is, whether it's for transportation or whether it's for just fixing up the city park or whatever the thing is, figure out who on your team is good at what they do. Let them go shine at what they do. Have the expectation, and then have a sense of accountability that did we do the thing we said we were going to do together? Because that's where the rubber meets the road. If you can't make it happen, who cares?
Excellent. So I have a couple questions that have come up in the chat. The first one is from Bill. Bill asks Lisa, Bill's a visual guy, so he's going to ask you to visualize, okay?
Okay.
So it's, Lisa, imagine I pulled together some Pete supporters here in Portland, Oregon. Knowing we're focused on infrastructure, what would be the thing on your agenda? Not necessarily you need to know what the agendas are for Oregon, but if I was supposed to bring some people together, talk about infrastructure and transportation, and I think you may have answered this, but what would be like the 3 things you would want to talk to us about in terms of motivating us to get out and speak to our neighbors about these priorities?
Well, first of all, what's your story of self? How does this affect you, your family, your neighbors, your business, your work? How does it affect you? So that you can then invite somebody else to tell you their story of self. How do you make that conversation happen? I mean, obviously in the certainly in Iowa and I'm sure in other places too, the story of self was like a really big deal within the Pete campaign. And it was because I didn't have to know how many billions of dollars were getting spent on this or that or whatever. All I had to say was, this is screwed up here and I'm tired of it and I'm not taking any more. How do you feel?
Yeah.
And I think that can very much go across, any type of cause. Now, if you want to be a policy wonk, go be one. That's great.
Mhm, mhm.
But that compelling story of self, and of course, there's three parts to the story of self. Number one, it's about you and how a thing is affecting you personally. Number two, it has to be true. You don't lie to people. Don't do that. And the third thing is, how does it tie to the particular policy, cause, or thing you're trying to change? And if you can do that very succinctly, and your story of self should be somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds. Obviously, I've been talking a lot longer than that, so maybe I'm a bad judge of it. But if you can do that, and then your neighbor or whomever can say, well, my perspective on it is this. That's where you start to have commonality. And that's where you get stuff done.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought up that piece. And I think that actually has a lot of uh, transferability to anything. And again, it goes back to this idea of knowing your community, knowing the priorities, but also what does it say about you? And what is your story of self? And we should all be able to kind of build into that. There was, I was revisiting recently the writings of Howard Thurman. He was actually Martin Luther King's advisor when he was in his doctoral program. And Howard Thurman wrote a book or an essay called Search for Common Ground. And this was back, decades ago. And some people in the landscape of social justice feel it's kind of watered down because it doesn't get to some of the inequities and that sort of thing. And I agree that when it comes to that conversation, it may not hit every mark. But I think there's some transferability. And when I was reading it again because I was also, I was looking at your book, I was reading something else, I was getting ready for a podcast, I'm looking at all these things, I'm like, there's so much here from the spirit behind all of it. And the spirit behind it is know your story, know that your story is not that antithetical than someone else's. When it comes right down to it, there's something that people are going to pull either in a positive way or a negative way. And I think one of the things that has happened in some parts of our lives is you see some folks on maybe the other side of the aisle using fear as the thing that galvanizes this joined ideology. I would rather be on the side of optimism and hope and growth. And that's one of the things that I think this campaign at least gave to me, and why I'm continuing to do this.
And this is a lesson for any project any of y'all want to go do in your community. If you don't give folks a seat at the table, if you don't give them a positive place to belong, there are other forces out there and other groups out there who will give them a place to belong in their negative attributes. Fear, their biases, their bigotry. And so even though I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, I'd never talk to a Trump supporter, I'd never do that. Do it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's critical.
Yeah.
Because if you can't give people a place to belong in their own community, man, we're all in trouble.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So did you do most of your connecting? One of the questions that came up, Christina has asked this question about, did you do most of your connecting face-to-face? Did you use social media? What was the medium that you used the most?
So initially I picked up the phone and said, hey, Mom, I need your help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's where initially it started out. And keep in mind that my family is still very extremely Republican, extremely evangelical. But they loved and believed in me, so they were willing to help me out. So never turn down that line of thought. People will help you just because they love you. eventually I would end up knocking on, oh geez Louise, I'm guessing I knocked on thousands of doors. But I like doing that.
Yeah.
I
You also gave up, you stopped working for like a month, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Although, I wasn't like the hero on the team or anything. I was far from the first person who did that. We just understood that the race was going to be so close that if it wasn't an all hands on deck type of situation, we weren't going to be able to. We weren't going to cross the finish line. It wasn't happening. So, yeah, I mean, but before that, even before that, I mean, I'd be on my lunch break and be out, ding dong, hi, my name's Lisa, how are you? And over my lunch break, I could, knock on 20 doors. Right. So if I was doing that every day, and other people were too, of course, it wasn't unusual to me, but it was just like a really easy way for me in the middle of my workday to be able to go out and make somewhat of a difference at least, and move the needle just a little bit. And every time we moved the needle, every little bit mattered. And then, of course, we had folks who came in from out of state, barnstormers and other volunteers. We loved those guys, loved them. We appreciated the help, but we tried in our own ways, in every creative way we could, to be able to go out and be in our communities and talk to people. Yes, I finally did do something. It was a little bit later on social media, but what I was doing was writing blog posts of it is now 76 days to the Iowa caucuses. This is what we did today.
Yeah.
And those got received very well. And well, that's how I wrote a book.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up about the use of social media. I think a lot of the things that we do is through social media. But what I try to coach people to remember is that you need to use your authentic voice. It can't be something you just copy and paste and just throw up there, because people will know it's not you saying it. I know from my own social media presence, like on Facebook, where these are people who know me, and my Instagram is locked down. So these are people who know me. So the people who know me and they see me knocking on doors in New Hampshire, and me working at a fundraiser, and me standing there and doing this and saying, look what I did today, that starts a conversation. And it actually was kind of not frightening. I think I was kind of like, what? I did not realize how many people were actually paying attention to that until in Massachusetts, we were a Super Tuesday state. And when Pete pulled out of the race on the Sunday before Super Tuesday, which this is not what the call's about, but we can have a separate call and we can all, have a cocktail and talk about what we were doing today. But I cannot tell you how many people I got direct messages from, text messages from, and that sort of thing, saying, I don't know who to vote for now. Whether you realized it or not, through these posts, conversations, and I would do things like Tracy knows, because she saw me do them as I was crazy. I would go onto my Instagram and I would do a live kind of like, this is where I am, and oh my God, I'm with Chaston. Look at Chaston, and we're about to go knock on doors. And I yell and scream and all this stuff, and people are like, okay. And then, but they would then reach out, and you would say, okay, let me tell you about Pete. What else do you want to know about him? And those are the conversations. I mean, there were other conversations before that where I had friends say, okay, we need to make an appointment because I need to ask you some questions. Great. And those were those things. And that if you are able to use social media as a way to use value statements about what matters to you, rather than people read it and feel like she's attacking me because I don't believe in this person, you're going to bring more people who are potentially looking for an opportunity to have a conversation. And because I really believe it is not sustainable to be hateful and unhappy for the rest of your life. I just believe that in my heart of hearts. And I don't want to sound like Pollyanna, and because I sure as hell ain't. But you look better when you're happy. You feel better when you're happy. You are better when you're optimistic. And when you're angry and nasty and looking to poke holes in everything, that is not sustainable. At the same time, it is not sustainable for those of us on the side of maybe optimism and forward motion to get so wrapped into the anger at what is occurring and say, what can we do to move the focus towards something that benefits our community and our country, and get people going in that direction. And this is sort of lined up to one of the questions that Christina did put in there, is that people accuse me of being this. Don't give them the space to accuse you to be that. Don't give it to them. Is someone going to be angry at you because you want to put in a roundabout and call you a fascist because you think it's good to fix a bridge? All right. Well, if they are, then that's okay. You can step back. But in most cases, people are going to tell me more about the bridge.
Well, I mean, and what are they going to do? Take away your birthday? What are they going to do? I mean, I remember somebody, I went and knocked on their door and they're like, we don't vote for socialists. I'm like, oh, thank God, neither do I. Woo.
Yes.
Woo. I'm so glad we agree on that.
I'm glad. Yes.
And by the way, neighbor, I need your help.
Yeah.
While we're at it. When you invite people in, even if it feels contentious in that moment, I'm telling you, magic happens. I promise it does. So our Warren County and Madison County, which if you look that up on the map, I mean, we're very red county, both of us. And there were probably 100 of us. I remember, no name, no budget, no nothing, guy from Indiana. There were probably 100 of us who I would call sometimes volunteers. So whether that was a thing that happened once a week or maybe a couple times a week or maybe once every other week, whatever. Of that, this is how brilliant that campaign was. Of those, let's call it 100 people, it was probably actually more, but let's call it that. 80 of us were first-time volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
Never volunteered for anything. 30% were Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
So never shut off that communication.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, there are lines in the sand I won't cross. I don't need to know what somebody who's a neo-Nazi thinks. I don't care.
Right.
Don't care. But I do care about the Republican who's dealing in good faith, who just wants their mama to have their medication. That I do care about. Or the Republican who is rather annoyed right now because they have to drive all the way to the next town over, going around the southern end of the county just to get back up to the bypass so they can go to the grocery store or take their kids to school. That matters. So I guess just have conversations with people that matter.
No, I appreciate that. Christina has a question.
Yeah, or I was just going to make a comment too, because I find this so refreshing because, when I did the calls for the Biden campaign, the whole thing was, all right, anybody, you get someone, they say anything, just say, thanks for your time and move on, and that was kind of the directive. And I just really liked this because, again, I remember doing a standout for Biden and somebody yelling, you hate the police, you hate the police. And it was like, no, I don't. My grandfather was a policeman, and just it I think that's it just makes, I think, a big difference rather than just being dismissive. And I think they were afraid people would get into arguments and there'd be name calling, but this is so different when it's like, well, why do you feel that way?
Right.
Or why do you think I'm a pedophile? It might have just created a different conversation. So I'll mute again.
No,
I mean,
and I think it's, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
It's the first question we learn how to ask when we're kids, right? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And then as we become adults, we forget how to ask that question. We need to get back to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because then you can understand, to your point, Christina, why would somebody scream that at you?
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, maybe they watch some propaganda,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they've been on a steady stream of Rush Limbaugh and Fox News for God only knows how long. But somewhere in that person is someone who is pragmatic, practical, who loves their family, who loves their community, loves their home, and they really want things to be better. And so continuing to reach out, and I have a good friend of mine who's just like, oh my God, Lisa, I'm exhausted. Why do we always have to be the good guys?
Mm-hmm.
Why? I was like, why not?
Yeah.
This is where we are. And so we need to continue to have those conversations and, invite people to come along for the ride, as it were.
I think that's a wonderful spot. Do we have any other questions? Because we're coming up at the end of our time. All right.
I have
So,
a comment, if
Go
I
ahead.
can just make a comment. Lisa, on behalf, I would like you to appoint you the representative of Iowa. I got to spend a week there for the LJ, and including a couple of days of canvassing, and Iowa will always have an amazing place in my heart. I met so many wonderful people on doorsteps and everywhere we encountered. Every turn, every day, Iowa just couldn't have been nicer to us, even if they weren't supporting Pete. And Iowa will always have a special place in my heart.
Thank you so much for coming, for supporting us, for helping us, for lifting us up as we were on the ground. We loved you guys. We did. And I didn't get to meet as many barnstormers as I would have liked, although I'm hoping to at the Soul Summit.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to, but we knew the needle that you guys moved. We knew it, and we loved it. And thank you so much.
I had a woman come up to me on the street. We were looking for dinner late that night after the LJ. And she walked up to me. Maybe she'd had a couple of drinks, but she grabbed me by the shoulders and looked me in the face. And she was an Iowa native. And she said, Pete's going to win Iowa. I can feel it in my bones. And I always remember her, and she was right. So thank you.
Yeah, we knew, even when everybody else was, even on caucus morning, if you'll remember, 538 was like, nope, he's coming in fourth. And I was just like, I don't know what you guys are paying attention to, but I'm just saying we're about to go run the table. And we did. And it was in part because of help from folks like you. So thank you so much. We did appreciate you so much.
It was our pleasure.
I want to emphasize something that Lisa just said. And it's this, that idea of, I don't know where you're looking at your numbers. In our time of the last 18 months where we've, basically been working and living in these bubbles, and for some people not even leaving the house all that often, we may have lost perspective of where are your numbers and what people care about, because right now we're so hepped into, these are the safe places I can go and these are the activities I can do. I want people to start to flex those muscles again and start having those real conversations again. And maybe challenge yourself to say, I'm vaccinated and I'm out and I'm going to do this. Or these are the things, and I want to start having these moments again, but we also need to start to get away from what we're being fed. And what I mean by that is when you're able to know your own body and your own mind and your own spirit and say, I'm being fed a lot of negative. I'm being fed a lot that isn't working for me right now. We should be in a framework of more optimism than I think some of us are. I saw some folks on social media start to get very keyed up about what's coming this summer. Apparently, there are rallies coming this summer from the former guy. Are you going to those rallies? I'm not going to those rallies. I'm working to move the country forward. And if all you're looking at is what happens when he gets to a microphone, you can't stop him from getting to a microphone. But I can tell you this, if you're at your microphone, someone's going to listen to you too. Your friends, your neighbors, the people you go food shopping with, you get that microphone and you speak. And you be heard. Your life is more like their lives. Your challenges are more like their challenges, and they will hear you if you want them to. And that's all I got to say. So there.
Oh my God, go tell it on the mountain. Amen. Amen.
All right. See. All right. So I also want you to know, Lisa, that when my husband and I were trying to decide during our pandemic, where the hell are we going to travel to, we literally made a list of places we're going, and the Iowa State Fair is on the list.
Well, that's where you get cholesterol disease and the diabetes. So it's great.
I'm okay. My cholesterol's in the tank, so it's low. So I've got a little.
It won't be.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. And we're going to put your book up in the chat one more time, and we're going to include it when we put it up on our YouTube channel, so that people have the link as well. And people, we got we have another Barbara's being kissed by a dog. It's all good. And so thank you so much, Lisa.